The holographic projection erupted with such savage intensity that several cadets instinctively recoiled. What began as a clinical historical review transformed into a maelstrom of human complexity that defied every known strategic principle. Eileen's telepathic receptors first registered something impossible: emotion as a weapon. The projection showed Europe in 1939, not as a simple territorial conflict, but as a comprehensive societal transformation that challenged every assumption about warfare the aliens had ever conceived. Entire populations weren't just mobilizing. They were metamorphosing into living, breathing war machines driven by something far more complex than survival. Observe. Commander Vexril's voice cut through the holographic chaos. The true weapon of humanity. Krillex's crystalline structure began to vibrate imperceptibly, the closest his species came to displaying shock. The mathematical models of conflict he had studied his entire life were dissolving before his computational matrices. Humans weren't following any predictable strategic pattern. They were rewriting the entire concept of collective action in real time. The Battle of Britain materialized in stunning detail. A handful of RAF pilots, dramatically outnumbered, defended an entire island with a combination of technological innovation and what could only be described as collective psychological resistance. Zortak's processing units began to overheat as he attempted to calculate the probability of success based on traditional military metrics. "Impossible," the mechanoid whispered, his vocal synthesizer producing a sound between a glitch and a gasp. Eileen experienced something unprecedented in her species' history: sensory overload from pure human emotion. The projection wasn't just showing a battle, it was transmitting an entire spectrum of human experience. Courage, fear, hope, desperation. These weren't just emotions, they were tactical resources that humans wielded with terrifying efficiency. A group of pilots, knowing their chances of survival were minimal, continued their mission with a resolve that defied every computational probability model. They weren't just fighting, they were making a collective statement about something larger than individual survival. The Holocaust projection arrived, and with it, a dimension of conflict that shattered every alien understanding of warfare. This wasn't just a military conflict, it was a complex moral struggle that transformed entire societies. Humans were fighting not just with weapons, but with ideas, with moral convictions that couldn't be measured by traditional strategic metrics. Krillex's genetic memory algorithms began to fracture. How could a species simultaneously demonstrate such capacity for brutality and such profound moral resistance? Zortak discovered something that threatened his entire computational worldview. Humans could transform systemic limitation into unprecedented innovation. The Manhattan Project materialized. Scientists wrestling with quantum mechanics, developing world-changing technology, while simultaneously debating its moral implications. They weaponize scientific discovery, Zortak muttered, while questioning the very act of weaponization. Eileen's telepathic circuits were experiencing what could only be described as an existential short circuit. Human emotion wasn't just a byproduct of conflict, it was a strategic resource more powerful than any weapon. The D-Day invasion broke every known principle of military engagement. Thousands of humans launching themselves against seemingly insurmountable defenses, driven by a collective purpose that transcended individual survival. They weren't just soldiers. They were a living, breathing embodiment of collective will. Commander Vexril watched the cadets, noting their progressively deteriorating composure. Some were visibly trembling. Others appeared to be in various stages of psychological disassembly. Warfare, he announced with clinical precision, is not about weapons. It is about transformation. The holographic world of World War II continued to rage, and with it, the systematic destruction of everything the alien cadets believed they understood about conflict. The lesson was just beginning. The simulation chamber shifted, and with it, the very foundations of the alien cadets' understanding of technological development began to crumble. Zortak's computational matrix started to emit a high-pitched whine, the mechanoid equivalent of a distress signal. What humans called technological improvisation was nothing short of a complete violation of every known scientific progression model. Commander Vexril's multispectral eyes gleamed with a mixture of professional excitement and personal satisfaction. "Watch closely," he commanded, "and witness how humans transform desperation into innovation." A holographic display exploded with a rapid-fire sequence of technological leaps that defied linear progression. The cadets watched as humans didn't just develop technology, they weaponized creativity itself. World War II materialized as a crucible of unprecedented innovation. Radar technology emerged from a desperate need to detect incoming threats. The mechanized brilliance of the Norden bomb sight demonstrated how humans could transform mathematical precision into a weapon of unprecedented complexity. Krelax's crystalline structure began to vibrate with an emotion dangerously close to excitement, something his species rarely experienced. Eileen's telepathic receptors picked up something even more fascinating. The human capacity to innovate was driven by an emotional algorithm completely foreign to her species. These weren't just technological developments, they were emotional responses weaponized into scientific breakthrough. The Manhattan Project materialized with devastating complexity. A group of scientists, driven by a combination of moral terror, scientific curiosity, and collective desperation, essentially rewrote the fundamental understanding of physics in a matter of months. They were simultaneously developing the most destructive weapon in human history while engaging in profound moral debate about its very existence. Zortak's processing units began to overheat. The mechanoid discovered something terrifying. Humans didn't just develop technology. They birthed it through a chaotic process of collective creativity that defied every known computational model. They weaponized quantum mechanics. Zortak whispered, his vocal synthesizer producing a sound between awe and terror, while simultaneously questioning the moral implications of doing so. The development of the proximity fuse demonstrated another layer of human innovation. What began as a seemingly impossible challenge, creating an artillery shell that could detonate at a precise distance, became a masterclass in interdisciplinary problem-solving. Physicists, engineers, mathematicians worked in a collaborative symphony that broke every known scientific hierarchy. Krelax's genetic memory algorithms struggled to process the information. Humans weren't just developing technology, they were transforming the very concept of technological development. Each innovation was a direct response to an immediate challenge, created through a process that was equal parts scientific brilliance and emotional improvisation. The cryptographic innovations at Bletchley Park appeared next, a moment that would fundamentally reshape human understanding of information processing. A group of mathematicians, linguists, and chess champions worked together to break seemingly unbreakable codes, creating the foundations of modern computing in the process. Eileen realized something profound. Human innovation wasn't a linear process. It was a living, breathing organism that transformed challenge into opportunity with terrifying efficiency. Commander Vexril watched the cadets' progressive psychological disassembly with clinical precision. Some were trembling. Others appeared to be in various stages of computational breakdown. The mechanoid Zortak looked particularly challenged, its quantum matrices displaying what could only be described as an existential crisis. Technological development, the commander announced with surgical precision, is not about following established models. It is about reimagining possibility itself. The holographic world of human technological innovation continued to rage, systematically destroying everything the alien cadets believed they understood about scientific progression. The lesson was far from over. The aliens were about to learn that humans didn't just develop technology, they'd weaponized imagination itself. The simulation chamber darkened, then erupted with a landscape that defied every strategic principle the alien cadets had ever learned. Vietnam materialized, not as a simple conflict, but as a living, breathing nightmare of military adaptation. Commander Vexril's tentacles curled with anticipation. "Observe," he announced, "the most dangerous form of warfare humanity has ever conceived. Krellex's crystalline structure began to pulse with an energy that suggested pure computational confusion. The mathematical models of conflict he had studied for centuries were about to be completely obliterated. The holographic projection showed something impossible: a technologically inferior force transforming an entire geographical landscape into a weapon. The Viet Cong weren't just fighting a war, they were reimagining the entire concept of military engagement. Zortak's processing units struggled to compute the seemingly irrational strategies. Guerrilla fighters moved like liquid through the landscape, turning every tree, every rock, every inch of terrain into a potential weapon. Traditional military doctrine suggested complete annihilation was impossible against such a force. Eileen's telepathic receptors experienced something unprecedented. These weren't just soldiers, they were a collective consciousness weaponized into pure strategic adaptation. The tunnel systems of Qi appeared, a subterranean network that defied every known principle of military infrastructure. Humans had quite literally transformed the Earth itself into a weapon, creating a living, breathing defensive system that could move, communicate, and strike with terrifying efficiency. Impossible. Zortak's vocal synthesizer produced a sound between a glitch and a revelation. No computational model could predict such adaptive capability. The aliens watched as small groups of fighters neutralized technologically superior forces through a combination of psychological warfare, environmental adaptation, and a collective will that couldn't be measured by traditional strategic metrics. Supply lines materialized, a logistical nightmare that demonstrated another layer of human innovation. The Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't just a transportation route. It was a living, breathing organism of military logistics. Trucks disguised as civilian vehicles, supplies moved through impossible terrain, communication systems that transformed every civilian into a potential support mechanism. Krellex's genetic memory algorithms began to fracture. How could a species consistently overcome technological disadvantages through sheer adaptive capability? The psychological warfare component emerged as the most terrifying element. These weren't just military engagements. They were comprehensive social transformations. Every civilian became a potential combatant, every landscape a potential weapon, every interaction a potential strategic opportunity. Commander Vexril noted the progressive psychological breakdown of his cadets. Some were visibly trembling. Others appeared to be in various stages of strategic deconstruction. Eileen discovered something that threatened her entire species' understanding of conflict. Human warfare wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about fundamentally transforming the entire ecological, social, and psychological landscape of conflict. The guerrilla fighters moved with a fluidity that suggested they were less an army and more a living, breathing ecosystem of resistance. They didn't just fight. They adapted, transformed, and reimagined conflict itself. A cadet from the Quantum Collective vomited, a rare biological response that indicated complete systemic shock. Warfare, Commander Vexril announced with clinical precision, is not about superior technology. It is about the ability to transform limitation into opportunity. The holographic world of guerrilla warfare continued to rage, systematically destroying everything the alien cadets believed they understood about military engagement. The lesson was far from over. The aliens were about to learn that humans didn't just fight wars. They transformed the entire concept of conflict itself. The simulation chamber transformed, and with it, the fundamental understanding of conflict dissolved like antimatter meeting pure energy. Psychological warfare materialized not as a simple strategic tool, but as a living, breathing weapon that defied every computational model the alien cadets had ever encountered. Commander Vexril's multispectral eyes gleamed with a predatory intensity. "Prepare yourselves," he announced, his voice a low frequency that resonated through the cadets' sensory receptors, for the most dangerous weapon in human arsenal, their mind. Eileen's telepathic circuits began to overload. What humans called psychological warfare was less a military strategy and more a comprehensive social technology that rewrote the very principles of conflict. The Cold War projection appeared, not as a simple geopolitical struggle, but as a multi-dimensional chess match played across global consciousness. Propaganda wasn't just information. It was a weapon that could reshape entire societal perceptions, destabilize governments, and create realities more powerful than any physical weapon. Zortak's computational matrices started to emit a high-pitched whine, the mechanoid equivalent of a system-wide existential crisis. The CIA's psychological operations demonstrated something terrifying. Information could be weaponized with surgical precision. Radio broadcasts that could topple governments. Disinformation campaigns that could reshape entire national narratives. Psychological techniques that could turn populations against their own leadership with nothing more than carefully crafted messages. Krellak's crystalline structure began to vibrate with an emotion dangerously close to terror. The mathematical models of conflict were dissolving, replaced by something far more complex and unpredictable. The projection of propaganda techniques during World War II revealed a weapon more potent than any physical arsenal. Posters, radio broadcasts, carefully crafted narratives that could transform entire populations into living, breathing war machines. Humans weren't just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with ideas, emotions, collective narratives. They can make an entire population believe something that isn't true, Eileen whispered, her telepathic receptors overloading, and that belief becomes more real than physical reality. The Cuban Missile Crisis materialized, a conflict fought almost entirely in the realm of psychological manipulation. Nuclear weapons became less about physical destruction and more about a complex dance of perception, threat, and psychological pressure. Zortak discovered something that threatened its entire computational worldview. Humans could create entire realities through nothing more than carefully constructed narratives. Misinformation wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon more precise than any missile, more destructive than any bomb. Commander Vexril watched the Cadets' progressive psychological deconstruction with clinical precision. Some were trembling. Others appeared to be experiencing what could only be described as a collective mental breakdown. The Cold War propaganda machines demonstrated a terrifying truth. Humans could wage war without firing a single physical shot. Economic pressure, cultural manipulation, carefully crafted narratives that could destabilize entire civilizations. Krellak's genetic memory algorithms were experiencing complete system failure. How could a species transform information itself into a weapon of such devastating precision? Eileen's telepathic circuits picked up something even more fascinating. The human capacity for psychological warfare was driven by an emotional algorithm completely foreign to her species. These weren't just communication strategies, they were comprehensive social technologies that could reshape reality itself. Warfare, Commander Vexril announced with surgical precision, is not about physical conflict. It is about the ability to reshape consciousness. The holographic world of psychological warfare continued to rage, systematically destroying everything the alien cadets believed they understood about conflict, communication, and the very nature of reality. The lesson was far from over. The aliens were about to learn that humans didn't just fight wars. They could create and destroy entire realities with nothing more than carefully constructed narratives. The simulation chamber darkened, then erupted with a landscape of such complexity that several alien cadets physically recoiled. Modern warfare materialized, not as a linear conflict, but as a multi-dimensional chess match that defied every known strategic principle. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan appeared less like traditional military engagements and more like living, breathing ecosystems of conflict, adaptation, and survival. Commander Vexril's tentacles curled with a mixture of professional fascination and growing respect. "Watch carefully," he announced, his voice cutting through the holographic chaos, "and witness humanity's most terrifying capability, real-time adaptation." Zortak's computational matrices began to overheat, struggling to process the layers of complexity. Urban warfare wasn't just about physical terrain. It was a comprehensive social, technological, and psychological battleground that transformed with every passing moment. The projection showed something unprecedented. military units that were simultaneously soldiers, diplomats, technologists, and social engineers. Human forces didn't just fight. They'd rebuilt, negotiated, adapted, and transformed entire social landscapes in real time. Drone technology materialized as a perfect example of human innovation. What began as a simple reconnaissance tool quickly evolved into a comprehensive technological ecosystem. Artificial intelligence, remote operation, real-time data processing. Humans were transforming the very concept of military engagement. Krulax's crystalline structure vibrated with an emotion dangerously close to pure computational terror. These weren't just military units. They were living, breathing adaptive systems that could completely reinvent themselves mid-conflict. Eileen's telepathic receptors picked up something even more fascinating. The human capacity for technological adaptation wasn't just about hardware. It was a comprehensive psychological approach that turned limitation into opportunity with terrifying efficiency. Counterinsurgency operations demonstrated a level of social engineering that defied traditional military understanding. Human forces weren't just fighting an enemy. They were simultaneously rebuilding infrastructure, negotiating local power structures, and transforming entire social ecosystems. They are fighting a war. Zortak's vocal synthesizer produced a sound between awe and terror, and solving social problems simultaneously. Cyber warfare emerged as a battlefield that completely shattered the aliens' understanding of conflict. Humans had transformed information itself into a weapon more powerful than any physical arsenal. Entire nations could be destabilized through nothing more than carefully crafted digital interactions. The integration of artificial intelligence, real-time data processing, and human creativity demonstrated a level of adaptive capability that seemed to defy the fundamental laws of strategic engagement. Commander Vexril watched the Cadets' progressive psychological deconstruction with clinical precision. Some were trembling. Others appeared to be experiencing what could only be described as a collective mental breakdown. Krulax's genetic memory algorithms were experiencing complete system failure. How could a species consistently transform limitation into such comprehensive adaptive capability? Eileen discovered something that threatened her entire species' understanding of conflict. Human warfare wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about comprehensive social transformation, with military engagement as just one tool among many. A cadet from the Quantum Collective vomited, a rare biological response that indicated complete systemic shock. Warfare, Commander Vexril announced with surgical precision, is not about superior technology. It is about the ability to continuously reinvent oneself in real time. The holographic world of modern conflict continued to rage, systematically destroying everything the alien cadets believed they understood about military engagement, technological adaptation, and the very nature of human capability. The lesson was far from over. The aliens were about to learn that humans didn't just fight wars. They transformed the entire concept of conflict, adaptation, and survival itself. The simulation chamber fell silent, a profound stillness that seemed to vibrate with the weight of collective revelation. Commander Vexril stood at the center, his multispectral eyes scanning the shell-shocked cadets. Some were visibly trembling. Others appeared to be in various stages of psychological deconstruction. The air itself seemed charged with a mixture of terror and unprecedented insight. "Enough," he announced, his voice cutting through the holographic echoes of human conflict. Zortak's computational matrices were still smoking, literal wisps of quantum reactive coolant drifting from its primary processing units. The mechanoid looked less like a sophisticated military cadet and more like a system that had just survived a comprehensive existential meltdown. Eileen's telepathic circuits had completely overloaded. Where once she had been the most confident telepath in her cohort, she now looked like someone who had stared directly into the heart of an incomprehensible universe. Krulax's crystalline structure pulsed with an energy that suggested his entire genetic memory had been fundamentally rewritten. "What you have witnessed," Commander Vexril began, his tentacles moving with calculated precision, "is not just a record of battles. It is a masterclass in the most dangerous characteristic of any species, the ability to fundamentally reimagine oneself under pressure. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle into the chamber. Humans do not fight wars, the commander continued. They transform through them. The aliens leaned forward, their various sensory receptors straining to capture every nuance of this revelation. Commander Vexril was no longer just an instructor. He had become a prophet of a fundamental universal truth. Every conflict you have observed is not a story of violence, he explained, but a narrative of radical adaptation. Humans do not see limitations, they see opportunities for reimagination. Zortak's vocal synthesizer produced a sound that was half question, half revelation. But the computational improbability. Irrelevant. Vexril cut him off. Probability means nothing when faced with human creativity. Leeline found her telepathic voice. How is this possible? No species can be so fundamentally adaptive. The commander's multispectral eyes seemed to look through her, beyond her, into some fundamental truth of existence, because humans do not understand the word impossible. They only see challenges to be overcome. He began to walk between the cadets, his movement both predatory and educational. Their military strength is never about technology. It is about their ability to transform trauma into innovation, limitation into opportunity. Kralax's genetic memory algorithms were attempting to process this fundamental paradigm shift. How could a species consistently defy every known principle of strategic engagement? They weaponize imagination itself, Vexril continued. Where other species see boundaries, humans see blank canvases. Where we calculate risks, they rewrite the entire equation of possibility. A cadet from the Quantum Collective raised a trembling appendage. Are you saying humans are superior? Commander Vexril's laugh was something between a bark and a revelation. Superior? No. Different. Fundamentally, unpredictably, wonderfully different. The chamber seemed to vibrate with the implications of his words. Humanity's greatest weapon, he concluded, is not found in their technology, their strategy, or their weapons. It is found in their capacity to look at the impossible and see only a temporary inconvenience. The alien cadets sat in stunned silence, their entire understanding of conflict, of species, of potential itself fundamentally and irrevocably transformed. The lesson was complete, but the true learning was just beginning. The Galactic Military Academy had never witnessed a moment quite like this. When the simulation concluded, 53% of the cadet class had already submitted transfer or resignation requests. Those who remained were fundamentally transformed, no longer naive warriors, but something entirely different. The aftermath began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Kralax's crystalline structure now pulsed with a new energy. Where once there were rigid computational models, now existed a vibrating potential of adaptive possibility. His genetic memory algorithms had been completely rewritten, transforming from a static database to a living, breathing system of potential. Eileen's telepathic circuits, once a precise instrument of predictive analysis, now hummed with a complexity that defied her species' previous understanding. She had learned something far more profound than military strategy. She had discovered the true nature of consciousness itself. Zortak, the mechanoid whose computational matrices had nearly melted during the simulation, now moved with a fluidity that suggested something close to emotional awakening. The rigid lines of its mechanical form seemed to have softened, replaced by a sense of potential that transcended its original programming. Commander Vexril watched the transformation with a mixture of professional satisfaction and something deeper, a respect that bordered on reverence. The Academy's Central Council would receive reports about this day for decades to come. This was more than a simple educational module. This was a fundamental reimagining of galactic understanding. Humanity is not a species to be categorized, Vexril would later report, but a force of nature to be understood. The implications rippled far beyond the simulation chamber. Diplomatic protocols would be rewritten. Military strategies would be completely dismantled and reconstructed. The very concept of interspecies engagement was about to undergo a comprehensive transformation. Those who remained in the class were no longer just military cadets. They were ambassadors of a new understanding, witnesses to a paradigm that would reshape galactic civilization. A junior instructor attempted to file a standard post-simulation report. Her appendages trembled as she realized no standard form could possibly capture what had just occurred. The transferred cadets would go on to pursue various paths. Some would become diplomats, others researchers. Some would simply disappear into the vast bureaucratic systems of their respective civilizations. But none would ever look at conflict, at possibility, at the very nature of existence the same way again. Krelax would eventually develop a revolutionary adaptive computational model that would transform scientific understanding across 3 galactic sectors. Eileen would become a groundbreaking researcher in interspecies communication, her work fundamentally challenging telepathic limitations. Zortak would design a new form of artificial intelligence that blurred the lines between machine and consciousness. But those were stories for another time. In this moment, in the simulation chamber of the Galactic Military Academy, a fundamental truth had been revealed. Humanity was not just another species to be studied. Humanity was a lens through which the entire universe could be reimagined. The lesson was complete. But the true learning was just beginning. A new chapter in galactic understanding had been written. Not with weapons, not with technology, but with the most powerful force in the universe, the capacity to see beyond what is and imagine what could be.